Okay, let me fix one or two quick things. All right, just my wife is better with the tech. Turned on. Hold on one sec. So what I'm gonna do is just kind of get started, and then when we really need it, I'll make sure that she's up here by then to assist me with it. So hi, my name is Peter, and as I mentioned before, I go by Scenza. That's my pseudonym for writing about esoteric topics. It just gives me a nice clear boundary between my personal interests and my professional responsibilities. I'm very grateful that you're here with me today, and I'm excited. This is a lesson that's been kind of percolating in my mind for a few years now, and I'm very glad that you're here to join me. I would ask that you could please mute if you're not actively speaking. This way, you know how picky Zoom can be, right? All right, so if you're not actively speaking, I would ask you to just mute up so we don't get any background noise or that that terrible moment, right? It's almost like a bad dream where we think we're muted and oops, I didn't really mean for people to hear that, right? I'm always worried about that in my professional life. I'm a pretty good person, but hey, you never know, right? When it's that close. So, so thank you for muting up. And so the name of this lesson is Hearing the Music of the Spheres. Yeah, the music of the spheres. And this is a very sort of recondite. Yeah, it's like it's a confusing, cryptic saying. What the heck is the music of the spheres? What did Pythagoras mean when he was talking about the music of the spheres, right? So the goal for today is to elaborate that a little bit and see if we can dig deeper on that phrase and what it entails and what did he really mean by that. Okay, so I'd like to start with a quote from Pythagoras. So people I'm sure are familiar with Pythagoras for his contributions to mathematics, the Pythagorean theorem that we all had to do ad nauseum in middle school and so on. But many of you here will probably know that he was much more than just a mathematician. He was really a spiritual seeker and essentially a mystic. And the way that Pythagoras looked at numbers was not just as units, right, or digits to calculate and figure out how much you owe in rent every month, right, but as sort of universal archetypes, as these universal principles and ideas that were part and parcel of the universe, yeah, and symbols of these ancient and eternal archetypes. So Pythagoras is credited with saying, there is geometry in the humming of the strings, there is music in the spacing of the spheres. So that's a unique phrase. There's geometry in the humming of the strings. So there's a relationship between mathematics and music. There is music in the spacing of the spheres, that somehow there's a link between music, what we listen to, and even the distances of the planets in our solar system. That's a pretty bold and strange claim. So the goal for today is to try to illuminate and elaborate that to some degree, right? And we're going to do that with two basic exercises. So this class is kind of divided into two main parts. In the first part, we're going to explore the shape of sound, the shape of sound. And before I go any further, I'd like to share a couple things with you in the chat. So just give me a moment because I'd like to share. I've created an activity sheet. So my profession, I'm a teacher. Yeah, so used to making lessons. And I've created an activity sheet that goes along with this, and it summarizes some of what I'll talk about and then much more. I included some of the theory behind that I won't elaborate quite so fully here, but might be interesting to others who are interested to go further and deeper. And so let me just grab that. I just want to make sure the permissions are set up correctly. I'm going to put that link in the chat, so you hopefully should be able to open it up. Yeah, anyone with the link can view. All right, so let's give that a go. All right, so I'm going to share this link, and can you tell me if you have access to that document? You should be able to view it. Can you click on that link and see if you can view it? You're good? All right, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you. Good. So if one person can do it, then, you know, pretty likely that we can all kind of get in there. All right. So this is the document that I'll be working from today. Thank you. Thank you. And like I said, I've summarized a lot of what we're going to do today, and it's, you know, I've kind of structured it, and there's more in terms of the theory than I'll be discussing today. Okay. So if this is interesting to you and you want to dive deeper, I've given you some references, of course, my own book from which these lessons are drawn. And also Michael Schneider is a terrific writer, and he's written a book called The Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, and some activity books to go along with it. And I've been fortunate enough to discuss and dialogue on these topics with Mr. Schneider. He seems like a really nice guy. And he's, you know, I would also highly recommend that book as an introduction to the field of sacred geometry if you find these lessons interesting. All right, so back to Pythagoras, right? So we have this relationship between music and math, which kind of sounds strange, right? So let's see if we can explore that. So this lesson will take place in two parts, basically. So the first part I call the shape of sound, the shape of sound. So what we're going to do there is explore the hidden mathematic, geometric properties of the musical scale. You know, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right? We all know the 7-tone diatonic, technically called the diatonic scale, right? And Pythagoras is the one who's credited with having invented, or more accurately discovered, this scale. Okay, so we'll look at the diatonic and then the chromatic scale, which is the 12-tone. Right, when we have 12 tones and we divide by half steps. Now, I like music, in case you couldn't tell. All right, so the first part will be the shape of sound, where we'll investigate the relationship between the sort of hidden geometry and mathematics of the musical scale. And the second half, we're going to reverse the script. We're going to talk about the sound of shape. Sound of shape. Yeah, so we're going to look at how the same harmonies, the same relationships, the same proportions that are used to construct the Western musical scales, the diatonic and the chromatic scales, are also present in certain sacred art, right? Sacred architecture. And for that example, we're going to use a cathedral window. Okay, and together we're going to work on drawing one, right? And so that's going to become a very interactive part of our class. So I hope that you have been able to dig up, you know, a notebook and a simple compass like you would use for drawing circles back in math class, and, you know, pencil and some of the other basic tools that were listed in the announcement. I see Amara looks about ready. Yeah, all right, nice. And so I would love it if you, thank you, Vega too, right? Cool. So I'd love it if you would kind of join us for this activity. That'll be in the second part, where we'll be kind of working on that together. If you don't have those tools, no harm, no foul. I've shared the lesson with you. Consider it public domain. You can use it yourself. You can share it with others. And if you don't have everything you need right now, you can just go out, run to Staples and pick them up, and, you know, explore these sacred shapes on your own when you feel comfortable and ready. All right, so we're about ready to begin with part one. That's kind of an overview of where we're going and what we're going to do today. All right, terrific. So in the first part, and now I really do need to, just give me 1 second. I need to get that other camera working. So Anna, if you happen to hear me right now, if you could please, I turned off the camera before. Can you please come up and turn it back on? I think I hear some steps. Good, okay. All right. Thank you. What I do, right?
It's not working?
Yeah, I turned it off, and, you know, it's an iPhone and I'm more of a Droid guy.
You disabled my video.
Oops, how do I re-enable it?
You have to click on it.
Which one are you?
I am the.
Ask to start video. Yeah,
Which one?
right
Yes.
there. Okay, sorry, 1 second, please. I want you to be able to see my desk. There we go, perfect. Okay, so you see my hand here? You see me waving, right? Sort of upside down. That's my desk. All right, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna pin that so we can make that a little bigger. All right, good. So you should be able to see, right? You can see my arm working the mouse. Is this now pinned effectively? Vega, does that look good? It's you can see this monochord, this instrument right here. All right, you can see my desk and all its sad glory. Vega, you're on mute. You can see it with a thumbs up? Yes? Okay, thank you, Becca. All right. Okay, so let's begin then, the shape of sound. Why did that just, did it just turn off? It did, right?
You have to pin your video.
Yeah, I did pin it. But can you still see you can't see my hand anymore, right? Something happened with the camera on this device. I'm sorry, I'm usually much better than this. So if I come back here, right, you can still see me.
Now I see you.
Can you still see my arm?
Yep.
Can you see, you can see, okay. Well, if I pin it again, let's try that one more time, sorry. I just want to make sure, I want to give you the best vantage point. You can see my hand now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect, good. I'm not sure why that happened, but I would like you to be able to see my workspace here, my desk, because this is a musical instrument. It's more of a device for exploring the background of music called the monochord. So mono, of course, means one, and chord is one string. This actually has two, which you're going to see is going to be helpful. So if I pluck it, right, of course, every string based on its length, its tension, and its thickness is going to emit a specific tone. All right, so that's what's happening here. And I've set these more or less to be in harmony and unison with each other. All right, so this device is called the monochord. It's a really, really simple musical instrument. It's basically a single string between two endpoints, right? So it has a particular length. And this one is a big one. It's 1 meter long. When I asked my wife, when she asked me, what would you like for Christmas? And when I said I would like a monochord, she almost threw me out of the house. What is a monochord, right? And then we had to go through the process of finding this 1 meter long monochord, okay? So this is a nice, good sized monochord that we're going to use to demonstrate these principles. So if you've ever played guitar, if you've ever played violin or any other stringed instrument, you probably know some of the relationships that exist already in a string, right? But we're going to develop that further. And hopefully by the end of this, you're going to have a very good understanding of the basic framework of the Western musical scales, the diatonic, which is the 7-tone scale, and the chromatic, the 12-tone scales that are most common in Western music. And you're also going to, I hope, see the hidden geometries and proportions that make up the musical scale. Okay, so this string is exactly 1 meter long. So what I've done is I've also, I have a little meter stick. We don't really need one because we can use our ears, but sometimes it helps to have a little assistance along the way. And what I have here is just like a little wooden bridge that came with so that I can divide the string. So Pythagoras, like we said, was a deep thinker and much more than just a mathematician. He was really a spiritual seeker who saw numbers as one expression of divinity. Yeah. And so when studying music and developing tonal scales, he wanted to preserve that focus on divinity, right? And so that's kind of back of the design of the musical scales. So if we have a string of any given length, there are 3 factors, 1, 2, 3 factors that influence the tone, the pitch that a string will emit. The first is its length. The second is its thickness, right? A thicker string will sound lower than a thinner string. And the third is its tension, how tightly wound or loosely wound it is, right? So if we have a string of a given length, thickness, and tension, it's going to create a characteristic pitch. It's going to create that pitch and no other pitch. So that is sort of intrinsic. It's a part of the string's basic nature. that it's going to emit that pitch and no other pitch, right? If we talk about vibration, this is very much in the vein, it's literally vibration that creates those pitches. Okay, so I've set this 1 meter string up to emit a specific tone. All right, I don't know what the tone is. It's not super important. And both of these are set more or less to the same tone. So then we begin the explorations, right? So if we think of this string as a single unit, then we would liken it to the monad or the principle of oneness, right? Because it's one single string. And the next thing, of course, in the evolution of numbers is to figure out how to get to the number 2, right? So when it comes to a string, what we do is we just basically divide that string in 2 equal parts. So we want to find the midpoint of the string, right? And if we do that, so now so here's the original note. And you can hear that they are essentially the same note, but just raised by 1 octave, right? And most people know that already. Most people know that if you cut a string in half, exactly at the midpoint, you'll get the same pitch as the same tone, right? Same basic musical note as the original note, but raised by 1 octave, okay? But, you know, in sacred geometry language, that's the movement from the monad to the dyad. In other words, it's the movement from the full length of string, which represents 1, to the half length of string. Sorry, I have to hold it down, right? Which represents 2, right? Because the string has been divided into 2 equal portions. So there's a ratio of 1 to 2, 2 to 1. Yeah, so there's a simple ratio. There's some mathematics hiding in there. But, you know, think about how boring music would be if all we could do was go. So we have two tones, and they kind of define the limits of our musical scale. But we don't have anything in between, and that's really, really very boring, right? And it wouldn't make for any kind of good music. So we have to figure out a way to introduce additional tones, but because of Pythagoras's focus on music as a form and an expression of divinity, we can't just randomly pick tones. We have to find some way that has order, that has predictability, that somehow speaks to his conception of the cosmos, right? The word cosmos, which I've included it as a part of the title of my book, indicates not a disorderly, chaotic, random universe, but an orderly universe that is dictated by specific natural laws that can be predictable and predicted and understood. And that was his conception of the universe. And so he coined the term cosmos, a term that is now ubiquitous. We use it all the time. Cosmos, which he likened to a spider's web. You know, there's design, there's geometry, there's relationship. It's not random and haphazard. So we have to figure out a way to introduce additional tones, but retain the principle of harmony. So if we think along in sacred geometry terms, well, okay, so we have the monad or 1, we have the dyad or 2. So logically, what comes next? 3, the triad, 3. So is there a way that we can use the principle of 3 in order to introduce a harmony, all right? So let's find out. What if we, instead of dividing this string at its 1/2 point, at its midpoint, what if we divide it at its 1/3 and 2/3 point? Yeah, so I've moved the bridge. So let me just kind of bring that back into view for you. This is now at the 2/3 point. Yeah, I've divided the string into a 2/3 portion, a longer portion, and a shorter 1/3 portion, okay? And we'll be able to tell if I've done that well when we hear the note that sounded, right? Because something very magical and amazing occurs when you divide a string into 2/3 and 1/3. So let's see if we can do it together. That's the 1/3 portion. It's not quite right. There, that's better. Listen now. Can you hear this? It's the same note, but just differing by an octave. But it's not the same note as the original note, okay? But listen, this is the shorter 1/3 segment of the string. Here's the 2/3 segment. It's the same musical note, but just separated by an octave. So there's a harmony in there. And it's only at this specific point in the string, only at this 2/3, 1/3 point of division, that you can create a situation where the shorter part of the string and the longer portion of the string sound the exact same pitch. So that's a very special placement, right? And that formed the basis of the Western musical scale. I'm going to prove it right now. So this was called the chord of triumph, right? Because it's not a note that is forced upon the string. It's not us artificially imposing order on the string. It's a natural harmony that is emitted by the string in and of itself. So it really brings new light to the word discovering, right? To discover. So what does it mean to discover? It means to discover, to take the cover off, to reveal what was previously hidden. You haven't actually invented anything. You haven't imposed anything. You have simply lifted the veil and made visible what was previously invisible. Yeah. So in this sense, we say that Pythagoras discovered the musical scale. He didn't invent it per se. He just discovered the natural harmonies that were always there waiting in the length of a string. So this is the full length string. And here's the 2/3. And you may, so number one, they're not the same note. They're not the same note, but they have a very special relationship. Do, re, mi, fa, sol. It's the musical fifth. Yeah? Sorry, my voice is not warmed up. I'm changing the octave because it's a very low pitch. Do, re, mi, fa, sol. Can you hear it? It's a musical fifth. So the 2/3 segment of the string creates a musical fifth, what we call the musical fifth, the fifth note up from the scale, right? From the tonic, the first note of the scale. And again, that is a natural harmony that is built into the string. And it's the only place where you can put the bridge where the shorter segment of the string and the longer segment of the string make the same note. Okay? So Pythagoras built his entire musical scale on the third division, so the triad. Yeah, because now what we're going to do, right? Musicians will understand how important the fifth is in music. In fact, there's a very important musical convention called the circle of fifths, right? And it's basic to music theory. So keep that in mind. So now what I have here, right? So here we have the original length of string. Right? And here we have, I'm not moving the bridge from this place, right? This is the 2/3 point, which is right? Do, right? Do, re, mi, fa, sol. That's the musical fifth above, right? So what I'm going to do now is treat this 2/3 length of string as the original length of string. And I'm going to divide that as if it were the full length of string. Okay? So I'm going to start with the 2/3 as my full length. And so we know that, of course, if we divide any string in half, we will get the same pitch raised an octave. So let's see, I'm going to place them. So this is now the 2/3 divided in half. That's not quite in the middle then. Pretty close. There we go. Right? That was our fifth. It's just raised an octave. But that we're not so much interested in because we already know that. So now, what if we put it at the 2/3 point? Yeah, so we should get a fifth above that. We should get a fifth above that, right? So if we start from our basic note, do, re, mi, fa, sol. There it is. It's a fifth above. Yeah. Here's the original note. This is the right. This was the fifth that we started with. Do, re, mi, fa, sol. And there's a new fifth, a fifth above the second note that we started from this bass tone. And then we went a fifth above it. And now we're going a fifth above that. And if we repeat this process, 2/3, 2/3, 2/3, 2/3, 2/3, we will constantly get the next fifth up from the previous note. I hope that makes sense, right? So this is essentially what is called in music the circle of fifths. Yeah, the circle of fifths is based on dividing the string into 3 equal parts. Okay, so that's what we're demonstrating here. And when Pythagoras says there is geometry in the humming of the strings, my understanding and interpretation of that is that there is a regular order, there is a predictable relationship, there are harmonies and ratios and proportions that make sense and create the musical scale as we know it. Okay, so it is not a scale that is imposed on the string, but it is a scale that is discovered, uncovered, and is a natural harmony of the string, right? They're emitted as natural harmonies of the string. So to summarize, we're obviously not going to do this multiple times, but what Pythagoras did was then to repeat this process multiple times. His curiosity maybe got the better of him, and he said, well, wait a second, what if I just keep going? What if I divide that new length by 2/3, and then that new length by 2/3, and that new, and so on and so forth? And what he discovered was that when he did that 7 times, he came back to the original pitch, but just raised by a half step, a little sharper than it was before. And then when he did that exactly 12 times, he came back on the original note. Yeah, obviously very different in octave. Yeah, this experiment, if you do it for real and you do 12 subsequent divisions of the original length of string, it spans, I want to say, 7 octaves worth of music, right? So it's a very, very broad range. But when you get to that 12th repetition, right, that 12th iteration of the original step, when you divide it 2/3, 2/3, 2/3, you keep doing that 12 times, you come back to the original musical note, just obviously at a much higher octave. And so that is why he stopped at 12, right? And that's why we have a 12-tone chromatic scale with the half steps. And then it was clustered into the 7, yeah, which is, as I understand it, because after 7 repetitions, he came back to the same note, just sharped. Yeah, so he saw order in that. And of course, you know, as students of astrology, that the planets are arranged in a very, very similar way, right? We have 7 inner planets, we have 3 outer, we have 12 signs. So these numbers 7 and 12 have important universal meanings and symbolisms, right? And so when the ancients were designing their musical scales, they wanted them to be consistent with their art, their science, their mathematics, their architecture. These same basic principles were worked through all aspects of their lives. They saturated their lives, and they wanted to present their appreciation for divine order across all fields of learning and knowledge. Okay, so that is the first segment, where the goal here has been to use a monochord, this funky looking instrument, to explain the shape of sound. In other words, the geometries, the harmonies, the relationships, the proportions that are hidden inside the construction of the Western musical scales. So the next time you listen to your favorite song, whether it be, I don't know what, Sweet Home Alabama, I don't know what you like to listen to, whatever you like to listen to, just think about how deep this whole system can run, right? We listen to these notes, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. We sing them, we use them all the time. We might be in a chorus, we might just like to listen to music, might play guitar or another instrument, all right? But this scale has vast and deep meaning, and it is anything but simple. When we really look deeply at its design, it is meant to convey an appreciation for the divine order of the universe. It is meant to discover the natural harmonies in a string and not impose some artificial human-made harmonies on a string. And that's a pretty deep pursuit. I'm sure there are different ways that you could do that, but Pythagoras sure did discover an interesting and fun and beautiful one. All right, so that's the first segment of the program for today. So let me unpin that for a second. I just want to come back and see you and say hi and check in. All righty, hi. Oh, good. And we've been joined by several others in the meantime, and I appreciate that and love that. So thank you. And so I wonder if, I'm willing to, if there are any questions right now, do a little Q&A after this first segment. And then we'll move on to the second segment where we're going to reverse the script. And we're going to, instead of looking at the shape of sound, I have to be careful myself. It's easy to reverse them, right? Instead of looking at the shape of sound, we're going to look at the sound of shape. So we're going to look at how sacred architecture, such as we might examine in a cathedral window, is also, you see if you believe me by the end, is also hiding the same proportions, harmonies, and relationships that are used in the design of the Western musical scale. So the building where sacred music is sung has the same proportions and the same relationships and harmonies as the music that's being sung within it. What a beautiful idea. What a beautiful concept. And how very, very difficult to pull off. So these were obviously very deep thinkers. They weren't happy with just slapping some plaster or some paint on the wall. Cathedrals, as one example, right? There are many different examples, but cathedrals are designed as living works of art, so to speak. You walk inside a cathedral and you appreciate it not just for the protection it gives you from the elements, but for the absolute artistry and beauty of the structure itself. And that's something to behold. So the architecture, sacred architecture, we might call it. Okay, so any questions right now before we move on to segment 2? All right, great. So now, Anna, now you can't say that I've never used my monochord. When are you going to use that monochord? I spent $200 on that monochord and you haven't used it once. When are you going to use that damn thing? Huh? Okay, she's here and she's down there. Yeah. Right. So yeah, she was kind enough to humor me in my, quirky and eccentric interests. What do you want for Christmas? A monochord. Oh, she's in the chat. That's right. Exactly. She knows. Been sitting on top of our dining room hutch because it's big, there's like nowhere to put it. Been sitting on top of our dining room hutch for like a year and a half. I think she bought it for me, not this past Christmas, but the one before. So a year and a month. When are you going to use that thing? Spend $200 on it, taking up space. You see, I'm getting in trouble right here. You see, I had to open my big mouth.
Well, I'm sure
right.
glad you decided to use it.
Yes, I had a reason.
You did.
I am that way. Yes, she'll tell you that's something that I don't blame her. That's something that definitely annoys her about me, is I don't necessarily get to my Christmas gifts right away.
He never opens his presents till after a year and a half.
I kind of did it to myself. I can't really, what am I going to say? But I swear, proof positive right here. I have a reason. I have a method. I'm just waiting for that proper moment. And today, right now with you, is that proper moment. Yeah. So I've used it and I will use it again. Promise, I swear. All right. So I'm going to put this to the side. Just give me 1 second. I have to switch my desk. I have to bring in the new materials. And you probably also want to do the same. At this point, if you have any sacred geometry materials, so if you have a notebook and some pencils, compasses, straight edge, and so on, a thin permanent marker to kind of make permanent the diagrams that we draw next. Now would be a great time for you to make sure that you have those materials and kind of gather them together. All right. So if you just give me like 1 or 2 minutes, if you need a bathroom break, this is also a perfect time for that too. All right. So I'd say like 1 or 2 minutes to switch this over. Okay, so I think that actually does it. Yeah, so 1 to 2 minutes, pretty close. And so I've switched my desk, and I hope that you have too. So now we're going to be working on section 2. Yeah, if you're following along in the manual in this handout, it's called section 2, the sound of shape. The sound of shape. So now what we're going to do is reverse the same principle. Okay, instead of looking at the shape of sound, instead of looking for the harmonies and the hidden proportions and relationships in the musical scale, we're going to look for the sound of shape. We're going to see if it's possible to prove or at least demonstrate evidence that when architects, sacred architects are working, that they are also thinking about and utilizing the same simple mathematic proportions and harmonies in their work. Right? For Pythagoras, so much of it was about harmony. And isn't it the same for us, right? In our lives, equilibrium, balance, trying to find that point of balance, right? Where we have a balance between our work life and our personal life. We have a balance in our relationships. We have a balance in our time that we spend on material pursuits versus spiritual pursuits. So to focus on the principle of balance is never a bad thing. Yeah, it's literally what keeps us alive, right? I'm a science teacher, yeah, by trade. So I think of homeostasis. I'm sorry if I'm taking you back to like middle school or high school science right now, right? I hope you did your homework. I hope you're prepared. Uh-oh. Teasing. So, but I think of homeostasis, this principle that the body, in order to remain healthy, the body must maintain a state of balance constantly, all the time. Whether it's our body temperature, our blood pressure, our sugar levels, you name it, we have to maintain balance. Balance is health. The loss of balance is disease, right? And that can be true physically. It can be true spiritually as well, right? So focusing on balance is never a terrible thing. So let's see if we can find some balance here. So I'm going to pin this up again. All right, so now can you see, now I'm going to bring this down a little bit because we can get a little bit, now that the monochord is it's a monster, it's a behemoth, right? But now we can get a little more zoomed in there. All right, so this is what we're going to be working on today. Yeah, that maybe is a better vantage point for you to just see it. Okay, so that is like a sketch, a drawing that is reminiscent of those cathedral windows, right? And that's what we're going to work on. As you look at that and say, oh my God, that's complicated. Yeah, it does. It definitely looks complicated. We're going to go through it step by step, shape by shape. Yeah. And I believe you can do this. Yeah, I believe you can do this. You're following along. You can do this. I'm going to show you step by step how we get from a blank page to this shape here. Okay, and maybe it's better. Let me see if I can make permanent that vantage point. That's not the right way. That's going to be hard on me. So hang on. What if does it matter, the vantage? There we go. All right, perfect. That's going to work for you and for me. Is that better? Now you're seeing it right side up, right? Yes, Becca.
Much better. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yes, Becca. Yeah, unmute.
Yeah, I was wondering, could you put that whole screen up and just you up there in that? Or do we have to have, it seems like it would be so much easier to see it.
If what?
If you could put just that, like in class we have astrology, she has the whole screen up and just her up there. You know what I mean?
Oh, like
He's-
a presentation
She's
mode.
talking about sharing the screen.
If I share my screen. Okay, you want me to try that?
Yeah, the other thing you can
remove the
do,
pin.
Becca, is you can pin it.
Oh,
If
but
you
this is
go
not
up
my
to those
screen.
3 dots on top.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, you can pin it. Right.
Oh, yes.
Do
If
they
you
not see it
pin
as
it,
pinned
then-
when I pin it?
Yes, I see.
Is that better?
That's better.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Much
Okay,
better.
so I'm gonna pin it, but you also should do the same. I'm sorry. So that's gonna be a Zoom. You should pin, not mine, but the one that says Anatorian. You should pin that screen if you
Right.
haven't. I apologize for that. Right. You want to pin my hands. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Is that good?
Awesome.
Not the one with my face. Wise guy. Right. Okay, so yeah, if you could pin my hands, I apologize. I thought that when I pinned it, it would be pinned for you. I guess that's not the case. I apologize for that. So you wanna pin the one that says Anatorium, okay? Because that's gonna give you the best vantage point to see what I'm doing one step at a time. All right, so now we're gonna have some fun. Now we're gonna do some adult coloring, right? I know this is a thing that's catching on, adult coloring. So we're gonna go from a blank page to this diagram, right? And we're gonna try to do that all together. And yes, it does look like a complicated shape, but I'm gonna go with you step by step. And just like in my regular classes, if you have questions, if you have concerns, or you need a little helping hand, please do not be bashful. Yeah, raise that hand or just, unmute and ask your question, because that's what we're here for. All right, my goal, as a teacher, whether I'm in my profession or here in this meeting, which you've been kind enough to join me on, is to help you understand the topic, not just to understand it for myself, right? But to help you to get that information. So this is the finished product, and thanks to my wife, who is honestly an amazing, super talented artist, for rendering the colored version. Yeah, and this is kind of a rough schematic, right? So this is the framework of the same thing. And now we're going to start from scratch. All right, you ready? Ready as you'll ever be? Okay, hold on. So let's get a clean page. And we're just going to follow along. Everything's laid out for you in the, everything's laid out for you, right? In the handout that I provided in the chat at the beginning. And if we need that again, just some people might have come in late and didn't see that. So let me just copy that link and share it one more time in case. Okay, so because my understanding is if something is shared in the chat before you enter the meeting, you will not be able to see it. So this is the document that I'm working from. I've created a handout to go with this lesson. Okay. All right, so now we're working on section 2, the sound of shape, the sound of shape. And our premise and our goal is to demonstrate that the same proportions that are behind the design of the Western musical scales, the diatonic and the chromatic scales, the ones we just talked about with the monochord and Pythagoras, are also present in the design of a cathedral window. How interesting, right? Let's see if we can prove that to be true. So what I'd like you to do, just take, I have some fancier compasses that, again, my wife was kind enough to support my zany pursuits and get me some nice ones. I'm going to use the same kind of one that you might have at home, just a simple store-bought Staples compass, that is like a student compass that anybody might have on hand. All right, because I want to show you that we can do that even with simple tools. And what I'd like you to do is open it up to hang on, I'm finding my little place in this thing. Yeah, I've given you some pictures, and here we go. Right, so open it up to let's do it all together. If you can't, open it up, so make sure you're working. So there's two sides, right? There's going to be an inch side. If I can get that in the frame. There we go, finally. Inch and centimeters. So number one, make sure you're working in the inches, okay? Because if you work in the centimeters, obviously it's going to be of a different size. And open it up to the 2-inch mark. Yeah, so that's going to give you a 2-inch radius, I want to say. All right, and then, so take your page and let's see if I can get you the whole page here. That's pretty close, okay. So you want to start at the bottom portion of your page. Don't start up top because we're going to be building up. So start in the bottom 2/3, a little bit to the left of center. Again, it doesn't have to be exact. And what you want to do is just find a point. And now we're going to go back to middle school or geometry class, and we're just going to carve out a simple circle. Okay, so just carve a circle, turn a circle. I love it. That guy, see, you got your tools running. I love it. Amara, nice. Awesome. I love that. Yeah, so just put that compass point in the middle and just turn a circle with a compass, not too hard. Okay. And the next thing you want to do, so the circle is a very, very important shape in sacred geometry. Just summarizing some of what I've written up in the handout. The circle is the shape that is taken to represent the monad or the principle of oneness. And there are several reasons for that. Number one, it begins from a dimensionless point, just like the creation itself began from a dimensionless point, right? And then all of a sudden, boom, burst into being. Think like Big Bang. Every point on the exterior of the circle is equidistant, the same distance from that central point. So the main meaning that is hiding behind the principle of oneness of the monad is sameness, sameness, unity, a state of utter and complete sameness or similarity. Okay, there are other reasons for it, but that's a good start. So now we have to, though, build the universe, right? We have to get somehow, we look around, we see much more than just sameness, right? We see diversity. We see wonderful and beautiful diversity. So how do we get from a principle of sameness to a principle of diversity, of difference? So for that, there's an ingenious sacred geometry solution. What we're going to do is we're going to use the same shape, because there's only one shape in existence right now, a circle. So how do we use the same shape to create something different? So what we're going to do is we're going to take that same shape, we're going to offset it. So take your compass point and put it anywhere on the circumference of that circle. Now, I would recommend for our purposes here that you put it more or less to the right, horizontally. All right, because we're going to build a certain shape. So what I do is I basically just put my compass point anywhere on the circumference of the circle, and I draw a new circle. Okay, now on the one hand, I have used the exact same shape, the circle. So I haven't violated the principle of sameness, but now I've created a new shape. You see this sort of almond shaped structure, right? This has a very important name. This is called the Vesica Piscis in sacred geometry, and it represents the principle of two-ness, all right? The dyad, D-Y-A-D. The dyad, okay, if one meant sameness, two is difference. The first time that difference has been introduced into the world, right? So now we have polar opposites. We have day and night. We have proton and electron. We have sun and moon. We have opposites, right? But they're in a state of harmony and relationship because one was built off the other. All right. So this is what you should have right now. It's just two simple circles side by side. So now we really want to bring out that dyadic relationship, that state of two-ness, right? So take your straight edge and find the two center points of your circle and maybe just darken them a little bit with a pencil tip. You can, if you can't see them, you can often feel them because when you put your compass on the paper, it's going to create a little indentation. And what you want to do is line up your straight edge with those 2 points and draw a straight line directly across the circles. All right, very simple. See what we got there? So we just have 2 circles with a straight line across them, cutting through the centers, the exact centers of each circle. And this again, we're into the realm of the dyad at this point, the realm of two-ness, difference, but it's still built on a principle of sameness. All right, good. All right, next we want to really bring that out. So one pause though. Remember in the first half of this lesson, we were working with a string and we noted the relationships and proportions of the string. If it's a full-length string, it represents the monad and it's going to create a certain characteristic pitch based on how long it is, how thick it is, and how tense it is, right? Length, thickness, and tension. And we know that if we cut that string exactly in half, we're going to get the same note just raised an octave. You follow me? So imagine this line as your full-length string, right? So this line represents the string. And we know that if we cut it in half, we're going to get the octave. We're going to get the same musical note, just raised to the next level of expression. So finding the octave here is very, very easy. When you drew your 2 circles, it created 2 points of intersection, right? Right at the upper and lower tips of the almond, the Vesica Piscis. So what you want to do now is draw a vertical And you don't need to measure. You're going to be better than a mason. Yeah, you're going to make a right angle without ever having measured a single thing. Perfect 90-degree angle right there in the center. Okay, and you didn't have to use a square or anything like that because it's all about relationship and proportion. Okay, so now you should have a horizontal line, which represents the original length of string or the monad, and we have cut it in half, right? Which we know musically, if you cut a string in half, you get the same note just raised to the next level of expression, right? In other words, the next octave. All right, good. So now we've introduced the monad and the dyad, the principle of oneness and two-ness. We've introduced the full-length string and the half-length string. So we've defined our limits, right? From the full length to the half length, those are the limits of that range, right? And all the musical tones, there could be an infinite number, are within those limits. All right, how are we doing so far? You ready to go to the next step? You good? All right, so now we've cut that in half and we've introduced the dyad. But of course, right? Again, just like plucking the full length string and the half length is really, really very boring, right? Bum, 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 super boring, no music. We need the triad to do anything useful here. Turns out you've actually already done the triad without realizing it. This point here, where the circle intersects the line, is exactly 2/3 across. If you don't believe me, pull out a ruler. It's not a cheat. All right. My circles across are 5.5 inches. That's a weird calculation, right? So what's 2/3 of 5.5? That one I'm going to do on the calculator because that's just a little troublesome to try to pull to memory. So let's say 1 times 0.67. And that mark should occur at about 3.6. And that's exactly where it's occurring. Yeah, so this is this point of the circle. Here is my 2/3 length, right? This pencil is my 2/3. And this section here is my 1/3. My 2/3 length, my 1/3 length. So we are creating so far the exact same harmonies and proportions that were used in dividing the string. And if you'll remember, when we divided a string into thirds, it created the musical fifth. Just for those people who might be wondering, it is a little confusing. It was definitely confusing to me. If it's a third of a string, why is it called the musical fifth? That's confusing. I agree. The reason it's called a fifth is because of a secondary order, not the primary relationship. The primary relationship is that the note that we call a musical fifth, do, re, mi, fa, sol, do, sol, the relationship is 2/3 of the original length of the string. So it's based on the triad. It's called a fifth because when Pythagoras created all those 12 tones, he then clustered them into a single octave to create his musical scale. And if you do that, this length becomes the fifth note in that series. It's the fifth note in the series when you cluster them all into a single octave. Okay, so in case anybody who's wondering, that's really confusing. Why do you keep calling it the musical fifth if it's 2/3 of a string? The fifth is actually a secondary relationship, okay? It's based on clustering them into the same octave to create a scale. All right, so then now we've got our monad, the full length, we've got our dyad, the half length, and we've got our triad, the 2/3 and 1/3 length. Let's throw in the tetrad, right? Let's throw in the tetrad or the number 4. The number 4 is also very important. We left it out of our discussions of the musical scale because it is possible to build it with just the principle of the triad dividing by 2/3, 2/3, 2/3. But the musical fourth is also a very important note. And it occurs at a specific point in the string and a specific point here. So what we want to do now is find the musical, the tetrad, okay? So to do that, what we're going to do is bisect the bisection. In other words, just like, right, if you take 1/2, what's 1/2 of 1/2? It's a quarter, right? 1/2 of 1/2 is quarter. So what we want to do is just kind of imagine this section's not there and we're dealing with half the string and cut that in half and then we're going to get a quarter. So what we can do is we put our compass tip, and you can do this here, put your compass tip on the exact midpoint of the string and extend it out to the edge of the circle. You see where I am right here? So I've got half length of string. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve arcs. I'm going to carve an arc upwards and downwards. Now, if I were to keep going with this arc, it'd just make a bigger circle, right? Because we're using a compass, really just a circle. Okay, and I've carved an arc. And then
Now
what
I
I'm going
need
to do, I'm
you
just
to
going to, yeah,
repeat
go ahead.
that.
Say again.
Can you repeat that?
Sure.
Yep, please.
Put your, of course, put your compass tip. So I have two parts to my compass. I have the compass tip and I have the pencil tip. That's how I'm regarding them to make the vocabulary standard, right? Put your compass tip on the very dead center of the string, right? Where you cut it in half, this X, right? Put it on the center of the T. And then extend the pencil tip out to the very edge of the circle. All right. And then what you're going to do is just carve an arc. You're just going to let the compass do what it does. It carves circles. But you're going to do like a partial circle. Okay, so you're going to get, if I can get this in screen, there. It's just going to look like a partial circle. Right there. Okay. Is that better, Vega?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. And then once you're done with that, just literally flip the compass over and put the compass tip at the very edge of the circle and put the pencil at the midpoint and then carve an arc in the exact opposite direction. Okay, so then I'm going to just carve the arc this way and you'll see that they intersect. And that's what you're looking for, is that point of intersection. You don't need to go any further than that for this purpose. So then what you get, it looks like a big vesica piscis just enlarged. See it?
Could somebody help me get a picture of what you're trying to show us?
Sure. If you could please pin. If you go to the three dots. So what's your name?
Yeah. Randy Purchase.
Randy. Randy, how you doing? Thanks for coming.
Oh, sure.
Randy.
Okay, I got the three dots. Yeah.
Yeah, go to the three dots. You should see the word pin, P-I-N. If you pin, so first you got to go to this image. You got to go to my hands. See my hands?
Okay, I got that.
Okay, and if you click on, if you go to the image of my hands, and you go to the three dots in the upper right corner of that tile,
Okay.
and you click the word pin, it should pin that particular tile
I
to your main
gotcha.
screen. All right, got
Very
it?
good. Yes,
right.
thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, we all learn as we go, right? The Zoom stuff.
Yeah.
Whoever knew 2 years ago we'd all be masters of Zoom. All right, great, Randy. Thank you. All right, anybody else needs a hand, a moment? By now you should have, yeah, two arcs that are carved, yeah, along the half, right? So now we have already got our bisection, all right? So this point here, just like we did before, this point up here and this point down here are going to bisect the bisection. In other words, going to cut the half string into a quarter string. And it's going to give us that 3/4 to 1/4 length. So all I do is just drop a vertical. Okay, just drop a vertical. And this point where they intersect, this length is 3/4 and this length is 1/4. So now we've introduced the tetrad. We've divided the string effectively into 4 basic parts. Okay, and the tetrad musically, the tetrad is the musical fourth. So in that case, we get lucky. Dividing the string into 3/4 and 1/4 segments gives us the musical fourth. Do, re, mi, fa, do, fa, fa. That note would be the 3/4 length of the string. So now we have, if you know anything about music theory, you'll know that there are 4 perfect intervals. The unison, which is just the note in itself. The octave, which is the note raised to a new level of expression. The fourth, which is a 3/4 length of string. And the fifth, which is a 2/3 length of string. So all of those perfect musical intervals, which define the musical scale, are based on the numbers 1 through 4. Now we can create all of those fundamental harmonies upon which the musical scale is based, using just the first 4 numbers. Yeah, so again, that principle that the same harmonies, the same relationships, the same worldview is being expressed through music, through art, through architecture, through science, through all aspects of intellectual pursuit. Okay. All right, so now we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. That's all. It's just basically we want to make this thing symmetric. So I'm going to just move to the opposite side of my circle. I'm going to put the compass point on the midpoint of the single line. It's already pretty much at the end of the circle. I'm just going to adjust it if I need to for any small imperfections. And I'm going to carve it out. Same exact thing. Like literally the same thing that I did on the one side, I'm going to do to the other. And then I'm just going to flip the compass again. I'm going to put the compass point at the very left edge of my circles. Just want to get that sunk in. I'm going to put the pencil point at the center of the line, right, where that T forms. And I'm going to carve out a symmetric arc on the opposite side of the page. All right, so now I have this shape. Okay, so I just did the exact same thing on one side that I did on the other. Okay, and you can see this is starting to get a little more complex. Remember, we started from a single circle, and now we're definitely starting to see the introduction of many different shapes. Okay, and then if you drop a vertical, yeah, so here now I've created 2 points of intersection. That's kind of the name of the game, is creating points of intersection and then uniting them. If I drop a vertical from that point, I will have divided the original line into exact quarters. 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters. Yeah. Yeah, keep in mind we're human beings, and if lines are not perfectly straight, or if circles are not exactly of the same size, that you might see these small imperfections start to work their way in. But just like anything else, the more careful and the more detail-oriented we are when we do these things, the better result we tend to get. I think of origami. When I was younger, I used to like to do a lot of origami, and origami can be very unforgiving if you don't have good crisp folds, and if you don't line up the edges of the paper correctly. Then by the time you get to the finished product, it doesn't have quite the same level of professionalism that kind of works in. So it's a work in progress, right? You just kind of try to do your best to create those lines and those circles. And if it's a little imperfect, so what? So are we, right? So are we. So that's life, so you just try again. All right, so at this point, you should have what looks like this. And to recap, we started from one circle, we offset and created a new circle to introduce the principle of difference from the principle of sameness. We drew a single line across them, which represents the full length of string, right? Then we cut the string in half, right? We bisected it by dropping a vertical. Then we cut the half in half. In other words, we wanted to find the quarter lengths of string, because that's going to help us to find the musical fourth, right? Which is the 3/4 length of string. So we cut the half in half. We bisected a half string. We found the quarter point. We did the exact same thing on the other side. So at this point, we have the basic harmonies and proportions of the musical scale represented. We have the full length string. We have the half length string, which creates the octave. We have the 2/3 length string, which creates the musical fifth. And we have the 3/4 length string, which creates the musical fourth. So this right here, which is the basis for our cathedral window, already has the musical harmonies of the Western musical scale. All right, so this is here, as we said, the sound of shape, the sound of shape. All right, you ready to proceed? Keep this moving. All right, let's see if we can give this thing a dome. Have you ever seen a cathedral without a beautiful dome or some kind of archway, right? So we want to give this thing a dome. So what we do to do that is we basically are going to put, now this is going to be, you got to be careful with this, okay? You got to be careful with this one because we're going to open the compass pretty wide. So if you're not if you don't keep that compass tip stabilized, it can slip. And then of course, lines are gonna kind of skew. So what we wanna do is, right, we wanna put the compass point on one end and we wanna go across the entire length of the line. And we wanna put the pencil point on the opposite end. You follow? And what we're gonna do is we're gonna carve an arc, in this case, only upwards. And I'm gonna have to stabilize this myself because this one's kind of hard because it's so big. So when I stabilize, I just kind of put a little extra pressure on my compass tip, not too much because I don't want to force it out of place. And then we just draw an arc upwards. And again, if we were to keep going, you're using a compass, it's going to trace a circle. But here we're only going to use a portion of the circle. Okay, so I've basically just created an arc, right? And then I'm going to flip it again. We use a lot of symmetry, right? We do it one way, we do it the opposite way. And I'm going to put my compass tip on the rightmost point of the circle. And I'm going to put my pencil point on the leftmost, right? So I'm going to use the full line here. And I'm going to carve upwards again. And it's going to give it a beautiful dome. A beautiful dome. Okay? So by doing that, we create this dome shape that is famous in cathedrals. When you walk into a doorway, right, a cathedral doorway, you will often see this shape. This shape is basically the Vesica Piscis. It's that same almond shape that we started with here. When you walk into a cathedral door, it's not just cathedrals, you know, but cathedrals are a really excellent example. When you walk into a doorway with that shape, it is meant to represent something. We are going from the world of many, where there is broad diversity and the characteristic of the physical universe is difference, right? And we are entering the doorway, which represents the dyad, right? We're going from the triad, difference and diversity, multiplicity, through the dyad, a door shaped in this manner, to the monad, back to the single source of everyone and everything. Right? That's sort of the spiritual concept that's meant to be conveyed by creating the doorway in this shape. This doorway is literally the doorway to our spiritual selves, back to the monad, right? Remember, the characteristic of the monad is sameness. And the basic principle there is what we've been taught in our various religions since we were kids, that even though we're all different, spiritually speaking, we're all the same. Yeah, that we are of different shapes and sizes and colors and you know, and there's so many differences in our human selves, but spiritually speaking, we are one. We are united. We are one family. And that goes for the whole, not just human beings, but the whole planet, the whole place, right? The whole universe. This is also taught in our Church of Light teachings, right? Do your utmost for universal welfare, right? The whole universe is a single living entity. All right, enough philosophy, back to drawing. You ready? All right, so now what we want to do is let's just extend this line here a little bit. Let's see if we can get that. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll be pretty good. We can, if we want, we can get a single line going from this. Yeah, it's going to depend on how very well we did our structures. It's not perfect, so we're going to unite them. Something like that, right? Just put a single line that goes up to the peak. Yeah, single line up to the peak, just to create like a division there into two portions. And by the way, you can see that like when I form my arcs, we're overrunning a little bit. That's not going to matter later, because later on, depending on our time, we may or may not do that together. But all you do is you basically just take your regular compass pencil and you swap out for a pen. You know, I wouldn't use a ballpoint. I'd use like an ink pen, like a gel or something like that. And you just take like a regular, you know, black or blue, whatever basic color you want to use, regular pen. And what you're going to do is you're going to remove your pencil and just swap in a pen, and you're going to trace over the lines you want to make permanent. Okay. And then any imperfections, very easy. Just don't trace them, right? And then erase them at the very end once the ink has dried. Okay. So now we have created the basic framework for that cathedral window, right? And at this point, we're going to take it a little further. Now, this is going to get a little more advanced, right? But we can do this if we go slow and go together. All right, this is going to get a little more advanced. If you get off track, just stop me, slow me down, or ask. Yeah, like Vega did before, like Randy did before. I hope you can tell I'm very much interested to hear your questions and help you along if you get a little stuck. So now we want to go to a 3/4 length. 3/4 length. So what I want to do, I'm going to get my compass tip on that edge. And remember, the 3/4 length was right here where we cut the half and half, right? We bisected it to create 1/4 and 3/4. And what I want to do is create another arc. So it's basically going to mirror my bigger arc. I'm going to create another arc up to that line that I drew straight through the center. Okay. So all I did was I put my compass tip on the leftmost portion of the circle. I put my pencil tip on the 3/4 point, and I carved an arc upwards. Okay. And then when you're, I'll wait for a second because this, it does get a little tricky. So I want to make sure I go with you. Need a hand, Amara? You okay? So from here, unmute for a sec. Yeah, if you have a question. I think she's cleaning the screen. Do you have a question, Amara?
Yeah,
Okay,
could
looks
you
like you're,
just
yeah,
go
go
over
ahead.
that, go over
Sure.
it again, because I'm on my phone and I can't see it very well.
Okay,
And
okay.
And it won't,
It won't pin?
won't pin, no.
Okay. So put your compass tip on the leftmost portion of the
Oh,
of the
okay,
diagram.
yeah,
Put
right.
your pencil tip on the 3/4 point,
okay,
the 3/4 point, where we made those arcs so we could find the 3/4 and 1/4 point, and then carve an arc upwards. Okay. And then what you're going to do is just reverse that. So then you're going to go and put your compass tip on the rightmost portion. You're going to put your pencil tip on the 3/4 point in the opposite direction. Everything's symmetric, right? And you're going to carve up to create that arc. It is, I like doing this because it creates beautiful images. I like doing it because of the theory, beautiful spiritual ideas that are behind it. I also find the process very meditative. When I'm creating these shapes, I find it very meditative. It's a really fun process to do. So if you've been able to follow along with me, you'll see that we basically just carved this new arc here. Okay, we did that by starting from the left point and the 3/4, and then from the right point and the 3/4 carved upwards would create an arc. All right, now we're going to get fancy. We're going to get fancy now. So now we want to put those circles in the middle. Okay, so what you're going to do is I want you to reset your compass to a 1/4 length of the string. 1/4 length of the string. So there's 4 quarters right here, right? So I'm gonna, for example, for me, I'm gonna put my compass tip on that 3/4 point. I'm gonna put my pencil tip on the edge, the right edge. You could do that here or here or here or here. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. It's a 1/4. But create a 1/4 length width for your compass. Okay. Jeremy, yeah, woodworking too. I like woodworking. I had a bad experience in high school and I was using those razor sharp tools and I sliced my finger. It was bad. And I wound up getting stitches. Yeah, so it sent me, unfortunately I didn't kind of get over that a little bit, but it's really beautiful what can be done. Do you do woodworking, Jeremy? Maybe you want to unmute and chat for a second from time to time. Yeah, it can be so beautiful. I'm just a little cautious because I had that bad experience. My poor little finger. I really sliced it bad. Those things are so sharp. All right. So, okay. So now what I want you to do is where these 2 arcs intersect, we're going to put our compass point. Okay. And you're gonna see, then you're just gonna carve a circle and you're gonna trust that 1/4 distance. So I'm just gonna carve a circle using the top of that inner arc as my center point. And what you'll see is that circle nestles perfectly within that space. Perfectly, hits the lines and everything if it's done right. Isn't that beautiful? And that circle is exactly an octave wide. All right, it's a musical octave wide. Yeah, because so we started with a 1/4 length radius, right? So if we double that radius to get the diameter, it's going to be a 1/2 length radius. And if you remember, the 1/2 length is the octave of the first original musical length of string. All right, so we've created a circle that is exactly 1 octave in length. If we were to put a line across, it would be exactly 1 octave from the original length of string. Okay, and now we're going to get a little tricky. So I need you to really pay attention and tune in. So at this point, we are, if you look at your compass, you'll see that based on the proportions that we started with a 2-inch radius. We're now at 1.5. Okay, and this is a little bit of a cheat, having done sacred geometry before. And what we want to do is we want to cut that distance in half. So can you resize your compass so that it's 3/4? Half of 1.5 is 3/4. So you're going to resize it until it's 3/4. So basically I just cut if I can just show it. I just brought it down so that the little mark is at 3/4. I want to create a circle that's exactly half of the circle that I created before. Okay, so it'd be an 1/8 of string, but we don't have any convenient 1/8. So I'm helping you just find it with the compass. Okay, it should be at 3/4. You can see it's at the 1/3 of the 4 markings there. Okay, and then go back to your original tip of the arc and carve a new circle that should be exactly half the radius, half the diameter of the original. So it's going to be a circle within a circle. All right, so it'll look like the sun with an aura around it, for example. Okay, so I just created a circle that is exactly half the distance, half the width, half the diameter of the original circle that I drew up there. Complicated stuff, right? I think we're gonna call it when we finish with this. And there's more that could be done, but I don't want to try to do so much over Zoom that it becomes too confusing for you, right? So I think after we finish this next set of shapes, we're gonna call it, and we can you'll see that we've created the rough framework for a cathedral window, and we've used the same ratios and relationships that are used in the design of the musical scale are the basis for this, sacred architecture. Okay, so do not change your compass size. You're going to continue working with that 3/4, and we're going to create a very, very famous shape in sacred geometry called the seat of life. So the seat of life is basically a pattern of 6 around 1. That should sound familiar to students of the occult, of spiritualism, right? Of esoteric philosophies, right? Because like the sun and the inner planets, right? Or things of that nature, this principle of 6 around 1. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a seat of life. And a seat of life is 1 circle with 6 circles perfectly spaced around it. It's very easy to do. You don't have to measure a single thing. What I'm going to do is there is a point right here where my inner circle hits that vertical. Okay, I'm going to mark it. I'm going to mark up my thing because I don't want you to get confused, right? So it's right there. Normally, of course, I wouldn't do that. But so here's the inner circle, right? Where that inner circle meets the line is where I'm going to put my compass point. So I'm going to put my compass point there, and I'm going to carve exactly identically the same size circle. Okay, so I should have 2 circles that are of the same size that are stacked, one on top of the other. And, if it's done well, then the edge of the little circle will line up with the edge of the big circle. And remember, we're all human, and small imperfections are not going to matter in the big scheme anyway when we make these things permanent and then color them and do things like that. Okay, so we have a big circle, then we drew a little circle, half the size inside. And now we're drawing the same size circle straight directly above it. And now we're just going to trace the points of intersection around the circle. So when I created these two circles, it creates two new points of intersection. You see those? So there's a point of intersection here, there's another point here. And every time I make a new circle, it's going to create a new point of intersection. And all I'm going to do is just chase that point of intersection around the circle. So now I'm going to put my compass tip on that point of intersection, and I'm going to carve another circle. Okay, and you can see that that circle nestles perfectly within the larger circle too. Yeah. And again, just like before, when I carve that new circle, it creates a new point of intersection. And that's going to keep happening as I chase my way around this circle. And it's always going to be equally spaced. So then I'm going to just trace this thing. I'm going to chase it around like a dog chasing its tail, making a little circle of itself. I'm going to put the compass tip on that new point of intersection. This structure is called the seat of life. It is a very beautiful and a shape that is basic to many sacred geometry forms. And it's basically 6 circles nestled perfectly around a seventh, a pattern of 6 + 1. When I drew that new circle, now I'm getting a few reminders. It intersects with the original inner circle. It also intersects with that vertical I drew before. So you can see I'm basically just chasing those circles around the center. If you need a hand, you let me know, because this can get a little confusing if you've never drawn a seat of life before. Pretty common sacred geometry shape, but again, if you're new to sacred geometry, then it will be new to you. Here I got another point of intersection, right? And I'm marking these with an X, but that's just for illustrative purposes. You should not do that unless you feel the need to. You should keep your diagram clean and avoid marking it up with X's if you can avoid that. So there's my 5th out of 6 circles around the outside. And you can see it creates this beautiful flower, like a floral pattern in the center. And all of this is done with just 7 circles. There's no additional tools needed. You don't have to measure anything. All right, and then I'm just going to do the final one by putting my compass point at that final point of intersection. And that's going to be a pattern of 6 about 1. And you can see now that we have this beautiful shape adorning our cathedral window, right? And if that were colored stained glass, you can imagine how beautiful that design would start to look, right? And that's just the basics of it. Okay. So now what we can do, so are there any questions right now? There's more to it if you look at the original one that I drew. But it does get a little bit complicated, and I'm not sure how well that would translate over Zoom, without, like, if I were shoulder to shoulder with you in a room and I could, like literally reach out and help you, then that would be different. But over a Zoom call, I'm not sure how well it would translate to try to go much further with that original diagram. But I hope you can see that we have here what is beginning to take shape as a very intricate, ornate, and beautiful design, very symmetric, pleasing to the eye, right? And we've done that. In the strictest form, the sacred geometer is only allowed 3 tools: the compass, the straight edge, and a pencil. And these 3 objects, the compass is used to make circles. And the circle, as we mentioned before, is the shape that is representative of the monad, the number 1. So this represents the monad. When you first make those 2 circles, that's the first time that a straight line can be introduced into the process. So the straight line indicates the dyad, Yeah. And then in order to unite those two principles, you use a pencil. You have to be an active agent. And so the pencil uniting them, creating the relationship between the monad and the dyad, represents the triad. All right. So that's why we use 3 and only 3 tools in the strictest sense, in the strictest practice of this discipline, because they represent the monad, the dyad, and the triad. And in the same way that we are asserting that God or goddess used those 3 principles in the creation of our universe, we are modeling that process using those 3 tools in the creation of our drawings. Yeah, so everything is deliberate, everything is done with intention. So at this point, are there any questions? I would ask, are there any questions or? Okay, so at this point, you should have a diagram that is pretty well designed. And so if you have, I'll just get you started on this. But now we want to make that more permanent, and we want to kind of deal with any small errors that might have come along the way. So all you do is just basically swap out your pencil, if you have a compass where you can do that, for a pen. I advise an ink pen, yeah, because ballpoints are just going to be a little hard. They work, but hang on, I'm just gonna get my compass ready with this. There, ballpoints will work. So all I've done is basically taken an ordinary, everyday, standard pen and just swapped it into my compass. Okay. And this is what you're going to use to just make more permanent all of those things that you've done. So you don't even have to go in the same order, but just decide which lines you want to keep and which lines you want to delete. Yeah, so I like the arc. I like the big arc, and that one is the riskiest of all. So really stabilize that pen, that compass point. You can see I'm basically just going to, now I'm going to be careful not to overline. I'm going to be careful not to go over my intersection point, right? And I'm just going to make permanent all the stuff that I've drawn that I like, that I want to keep. Now you do want to be especially careful when you start working with that pen, because as I'm sure you can appreciate, once you pick up the pen, if you have a little faux pas, if there's a little slip of the hand or whatever, it's going to be permanent. It's going to be a part of the diagram. All right, so what I basically do is just trace out the same shapes that I did originally. Okay, and I like those arcs, so I'm going to keep those arcs. And I'm just tracing out, right? You could do the same. You don't really need to do it in a particular order. That's why I'm not giving direct instruction on this, because you just basically determine which ones you like and which ones you want to keep. I like the circle in the middle. So for the purposes here, I'm going to keep that circle. And I remember that that circle was exactly a quarter. So I'm going to go back here and pick up a quarter. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to trace that circle. And then the little circles were exactly half of that. So they were 3/4 of an inch. So then I'm going to go into the middle and I'm just going to double check that it's sitting on the line the way it's supposed to. And now I'm just going to darken the inner circle. I'm going to go up and retrace the seed of life. I'm going to just chase those circles around the inner circle. It's going to create that seed of life, but now in the pen, in permanent pen. This is the kind of thing you can certainly do after hours, you know. I find this practice very relaxing and meditative, like Jeremy and I were discussing before. Thank you, Amara. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it. Appreciate you. And basically, I've traced all 6 of those circles. So you can see what we have here so far. Yeah, and give that a moment to dry. and then take your good old fashioned school eraser and just get rid of all the pencil lines. Yeah, if you have a good size eraser, this will make your life a lot easier. Just get rid of all those pencil lines. I forgot to do the original length of string. Look at that. I'm gonna get my straight edge and my pen, and I'm going to do that original line to give myself a base. Okay, now I got a base. And let that dry. You don't want to smear it. And now I'm just going to take out all the hidden architecture, all the hidden proportion and relationship that allowed me to create these shapes. Now I have the basis for my cathedral window. Okay, and hopefully you have something that looks a little like this. Yeah. So if I can get that focused up there. So there's the beginning, right? That certainly is starting to look like what we took a look at the beginning. All right. So I have here, and just to remind you, right, because the assertion, we're coming up close. The assertion at the beginning of this class was that the same mathematic proportions, relationships, harmonies, whatever you want to call them, are behind the creation of the Western musical scales, the diatonic and the chromatic scales, and are behind the formation of certain types of sacred architecture. And we use the cathedral window as an example of that. So to remind you, here's the original length, right? If we think of this line at the bottom as the original length of string, it's going to have a certain vibration. It's going to be, when we pluck it, it's going to emit a certain tone based on its length, tension, and thickness. If we cut it in half, we're going to get exactly the octave of that original pitch. If we cut it into 2/3, we're going to get the musical fifth. If we cut it into 3/4, we're going to get the musical fourth. So the building in which sacred music is sung also has the same relationships, the same proportions, the same harmonies built into its structure as the musical scale itself. Okay, and that is kind of the main point and the main purpose of this lesson. Yeah, so I'm going to come out of the pinning phase and come take a look at you again. And here we are back in our gallery view. Hi, Ms. Vega. Hey, Becca. How you doing? How are you? All right. And that's pretty much what I wanted to, what I was hoping to share with you today. I hope that this lesson has been beneficial to you. I hope that you've had a chance to think about the musical scales, right? We hear all these songs, so many songs based on the Western musical scale, all the rock songs, most of the classical music, right? Any genre, they're all based on these two basic scales, diatonic and chromatic. And I hope that this lesson has given you a chance to think about the design and the formation of the musical scales in greater detail and depth. And I hope that we've been able to effectively communicate how not only the shape of sound shares those proportions, right? Not only the design of the musical scale shares those proportions, but the sound of shape. In other words, the design of the architecture of churches and other sacred buildings around the world also, in some cases, has the same basic mathematical proportions hidden within those walls. Isn't that neat? They were
Yes.
deep thinkers. They were very deep thinkers. So the next time that you walk through a cathedral door and you see this very characteristic archway, I want you to think of this class. And I want you to think of how that is meant to convey the movement from the world of many to the world of one, right? To that spiritual universe when we enter a church or a synagogue or a mosque or whatever, right? To a spiritual universe where we go from being the many to being the one, right? where we come back to our spiritual roots and we get back in touch with the monad. All right, we get back in touch with our source. Jeremy, it's been my pleasure. Thank you. Oh no, Rebecca, you couldn't find that compass, but you know what? It's only a store away, and you got the lesson. You got the lesson. And you can certainly connect to the, like you said, to the music, right? And if you want to pick this up and give it a good old-fashioned try when you dig up that compass, that's, you know, you got the lesson, right? You got the lesson. So you're very welcome to share that. You're very welcome to save a copy for yourself. All right. So again, thank
And
you all for
remember,
joining
Peter,
me.
that we're
Yes.
recording you
Oh,
so
right.
that we
Yes.
can actually see it again.
That's the see. Gotta watch your reruns. How many times
the
have watched
reruns.
Frank Barone is my hero. No, I probably shouldn't have said that. How
Do
many
we
times you
wanna-
see Everybody Loves Raymond or The Office or those shows, right?
Yep.
So reruns are fine. All right. So thank you, Vega. Did you want to close the meeting in the customary manner?
I will certainly close the meeting in the customary manner. And we're gonna stop the recording first.